right, so welcome to One Man Band and our Masters of the Musiverse series. Today we're speaking with composer, conductor, educator, Dr. Erika Svanoe. If you don't know Dr. Svanoe's music, you need to familiarize yourself with her work. She is amazing and creative. I've got a link down below to her website, as well as to link to some of my favorite pieces of hers. And then lastly, before we begin, I just want to remind you to hit subscribe and even visit my Patreon page to see if you can help support me on this journey that I'm taking. Dr. Svanoe, thank you so much for taking time to talk today.
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
Like, what kind of triggered the beginning of you pursuing composition?
Well, I was really lucky, frankly, to have the gift of time. I had, my husband had taken a job and that, so we needed to relocate. So I left a position, and for a couple of years, I had some time on my hands. And that really, I think a lot of us who are in creative fields, you know, we just need to create stuff. And so since I wasn't, you know, creating music in the usual mode that I do, which is, at least up till that point, which was conducting a group, since I didn't have that, I really needed to put that energy into something. And so it took a little while to get that going, but eventually I just really started putting time and effort and energy into composing music, and that's kind of how that started. Now I'm employed full time again, and but I still enjoy and love making the time to put into writing. So I think it's a new part of how I create art at this point.
We're going to pause here and take a listen to Mary Shelley Meets Frankenstein, one of Erika's pieces, and then we will have her talk a little bit more about it. I'd like to talk a little bit about like the backstory of the piece, like how you created that, how that came about.
Yeah, and this is actually the first version. There is a full band version of this that I'm able to expand beyond the 4 saxophones. So there is another edition. And actually, I'm just now, yesterday started a version of this that will be for flexible chamber instrumentation, specifically geared towards next fall. And the concept behind that will be that you can basically Frankenstein your ensemble together, and your ensemble can pick and choose who's going to play what part. So it's going to be really as flexible as possible. And I'm hoping that people will have many creative iterations of how they sort of orchestrate it on their own. So that's the concept of that is now I'm just executing the process of that. But this is the original version that I created for saxophone quartet.
I think that is awesome, especially considering what we are looking at for this fall.
Yes.
We're gonna definitely need things like that on hand. So I'll be watching out for that.
Yeah. Okay. So here is the original score. And so again, the sort of concept of this, of Mary Shelley meeting her own sort of monstrous creation. So when I'm referring to Frankenstein, I'm not talking about Dr. Frankenstein. It's sort of Frankenstein as we colloquially know him today, as the monster figure that is the creation. And so she's basically meeting her own creation. And in the original story, Frankenstein is an extremely sympathetic character. He is not really the monster that he's sort of made out to be on first impression. He's very sympathetic. And that's really a lot of the point of Mary Shelley's book, is that Dr. Frankenstein really abandons his creation. And so I thought about the idea of this conflict between Mary Shelley, her inner conflict of being sympathetic towards her own creation, but at the same time horrified, because it is horrifying to have this creature brought to life from the dead. So sort of that inner conflict of hers. I was thinking of her sort of melody here in the soprano sax being one of the higher instruments, and sort of with that upper range sort of being a little bit more feminine, as female voices tend to be on the higher side. And her sort of melody is built around this descending chromatic scale right here. And then, so that starts, and I sort of thought about how would these two interact, and for some reason I thought, well, it should be a tango. That seems right. And I thought about, I'm not an expert in tango, the dance, but I always imagine these sharp movements of people coming together and apart, and together and apart, and sort of the way that dance goes as her kind of inner conflict of wanting to be sympathetic but also being repelled at the same time. So that was sort of the movement in the picture in my mind. So that's how I sort of justified making it a little bit of a tango. So she's got this descending melody that goes for a while, and then I'm going to skip ahead here. So I actually saved the Barry sax entrance for this sort of rude interruption here about 14 measures in that he's sort of being a little bit shy, and then sort of lumbers into the room with this not very graceful sort of entrance right here. And then we sort of have this tango melody. Okay, so later on we have what I call Frankenstein's theme, which is sort of in contrast. So Mary Shelley's theme was going down by half step, and this is the start here in the Barry sax at the end of this page, with this big leap of a ninth. a minor ninth. So it's kind of the opposite. So not only is it heading up very quickly, but it's the opposite interval of Mary Shelley's, minor second to a minor ninth. And so I also thought that minor ninth sounded very like that pleading of I wanted it to feel as human as possible, like this need of wanting to be accepted, and sort of pleading with Mary Shelley for that sort of sympathy. And so you can see as the melody continues here at D, that it heads up with that sort of hope and optimism and that sort of pleading. There's a lot of minor second resolution up a half step where it's sort of dissonant and then resolves to a more consonant interval. So basically that's basically the piece. It's a tango, and I've got one theme that's sort of descending and another one that's has a big leap up, and sort of the contrast between these two. Sometimes they occur at the same time. Sometimes they're transformed. Later on here, I put the melody in, it's right here in the tenor and bari sax, basically octaves apart, except sometimes there's some dissonance that happens in there, and it gets pretty crunchy on the low end of the saxophone tessitura, that really should sound bad in a good way. It's intentionally supposed to sound pretty dissonant. Right around measure 75, and we see that Mary Shelley is sort of descending down here to this is a concert middle C, and we have the bari sax ascending up to that same middle C, and that's the only part of the piece that is in unison. And so that is kind of where I imagine that they meet, and it's very literal in my note choice. And that's where things start to go wrong, is after they actually, maybe touch or get a little bit too close. And then we start to see Mary Shelley get pretty anxious with all these 16th notes. And then we see the monster's anger here in the low register of the tenor and bari sax.
So judging by what you've written, the program notes, and what we just talked about right now, it seems that you really like storytelling, and I'm just kind of curious about the connections that you feel with storytelling and composition. Like, do you always feel like you're telling a story? And
I do think that most, not all, but a lot of the music that I write does tend to be programmatic. But it's sort of like varying levels of programmatic. So Mary Shelley Meets Frankenstein clearly is on the programmatic end of that spectrum. So is The Haunted Carousel. Steampunk Suite absolutely is sort of trying to musically, my husband called me a musical illustrator. But then I think that there's also, we are dealing with instrumental music. So actually Echoes, I feel like, is programmatic because I was sort of basing it on some ideas and feelings I had based on the Kirkbride building that you had commissioned the piece to be about. But at the same time, that's really about the notes. Like, there's a 6-note motive. And so I don't think it's that literal of there's not like a clear story there. It's more like just a feeling. Yeah. And then I have another piece that is definitely on the absolute end of the spectrum, where there's really no story. And that is a piece that will be premiered, hopefully when the pandemic is over. This piece will be premiered. It got delayed from the spring. And that's First Suite Fanfare, where I take the chaconne melody of the Holst First Suite in E flat, and I transform that into I think it's like a 4.5 minute sort of fanfare-ish sort of piece. And that's completely based on like the notes. There's no story. It's just, I love Holst First Suite in E flat, and I'm gonna borrow that melody.
Sweet. At the end of Barnum and Tesla, the performance note says the conductor may take the opportunity to turn this moment into a performance bit a la P.T. Barnum if they so choose. I saw the MMEA All-State Band perform this movement with Emily Trinan, and she turned around and gave, I hope it's on video somewhere because it's the sassiest wink I've ever seen. It caught me so off guard because I've never seen the piece performed live. I didn't know it was coming. And it was just like, what just happened? And then the final chord. So how did that come about, that little idea?
Yeah, I sort of put that in there partly because I'm a conductor myself, and it's so rare. I mean, our job as conductors is to serve the music. And this was just a little bit of like, let's let the conductor have this performative moment that is like funny. And, if they, I just wanted to leave it open for people to like give them that, it's okay for me to be a little bit of a show person in this moment. It's appropriate, is kind of giving people permission. And so I was at the summer rehearsal for the All-State Band, and it was just an amazing rehearsal because those students just played so well, and it was so much fun. And we got to that end point, and we started talking about it, or I think I brought it up. I sort of put Emily on the spot, actually. I said, usually what I usually do is I pretend like the piece is done on the rest, and then I start to turn around, and everybody should relax, and then I'm trying to trick the audience into getting them to laugh or to clap early. I want them to think the piece is done after the stinger, and then we give the big ta-da, and it should be like, oh, it's not done yet. So, we started talking about it, and I think Emily came up with the idea, like, should I turn around and wink? And I said, that sounds great. And so that's how she chose to sort of interpret that. And so I put her on the spot a little bit, but I think deep down she really enjoyed that moment of like sassiness. She went full out and completely embraced it, and I thought it was fantastic. So
it was. I'm so glad I was there for that moment. I had a great seat. I was really close to her, so I really got a good view of it. It was awesome. How do people set up a commission with you? What's the easiest way to start the conversation?
Usually, I'm pretty Googleable, so my website comes up pretty quickly. And they usually, if they don't know me, I will say a lot of the commissions I get are from people, at least half are from people who actually know me personally, like we met at a conference, or I worked with their band, or some other relationship. So that's probably about half the people who contact me. And the other half are people who, maybe liked the Haunted Carousel or liked some other piece that they had heard of, and that sparked their interest enough to search me out and to contact me through my web form on my website. And that's kind of how that gets started. From there, we usually have a phone call, and I sort of learn about what they're interested in, and we get to know each other, and then putting out sort of a contract and agreement, and making sure everybody's on the same page as far as what the expectations are. And so I feel like being clear and direct with any sort of financial and time details is really just beneficial for everybody.
Yeah.
And I've gotten better at that as I've done this more. I feel like just being clear and direct, and there's nothing like having 50 middle schoolers needing those parts. Like, I will tell you, the motivation to hit deadlines is mostly like thinking of those students needing that rehearsal time, and that really kicks my butt into gear. So
sure. I'd like to use this just to take a moment to just tell people this is an easy process to do. You can find lots of support within your community to have music written about your community, about your school. Composers are very open to this process. They want to make money making music, and they want to do it for you. So it's June 2020 right now. What does your commission schedule look like? Are you busy, or have things slowed down because of our situation? Or
this year I'm taking on 2. And then additionally this summer, I'm sort of reworking some of my own works for this flexible instrumentation. And so I think that's a pretty good short-term goal, is to work on getting a couple pieces ready for Flex Ensemble, which is, it's really a lot of orchestration work and part prep. It's not too much creative energy, but it's, you know, it's like kind of just making stuff to make it work. And then I have a commission with a group in Hastings and a commission with a youth group in Michigan. And so I'm excited to work on both of those. I think they both have spring premieres, so I'll probably start them mid-summer.
Okay. In regards to the Flex stuff you're writing, will that be available on your website?
Yeah, my intention with that is, like, I'm going to start with the Mary Shelley piece, and that'll be on my website. I think what I'm going to do is, if you buy the full band version, I'm just going to include it, but I'll also have a separate just Flex band version that's probably going to be priced at a lower price point as well. And anybody who's bought, like, I had a couple groups in Minneapolis that bought Mary Shelley and then couldn't do it last spring. And so I'm just going to send them the Flex band stuff as like a bonus for this next school year. So that's kind of the plan with that.
All right.
But yeah, it'll all be self-published on my website.
I mentioned this the first time we met with my students, that there's something about you and your music that feel unique. And I think that you're a unique person. And when I say that, I mean that, 100% as a compliment. So I was thinking about the things that I know about you, the idea that you created a board game based on Pride and Prejudice. You recorded your college band here playing 4 minutes and 33 seconds. You used theremin in one of your pieces. You asked for awful sounding cowbell or fantastic sounding tin can. Even your titles, Steampunk Suite, Haunted Carousel, they're all very enticing and interesting. So a question I have for you is, when you start a project, do you purposely set out to be unique, or just true to what you want to do?
I think it's really being true to what you want to do and being true to who you are. And so, it's taken me a long time, but I've basically embraced the fact that I'm a huge nerd, and I'm just okay with that now. It took a long time to get there, but that's kind of where I'm at. And so, I love playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I love choose your own adventure books. And then that idea sparks, well, could I do a choose your own adventure piece of music? And then it's more just problem solving. How can I make that happen? And so I don't think it's coming from a place of trying to be too unique. In fact, I think for me that might get too far out of the box. I think there's something about sincerity in there. That is always a concern to me. Can I be sincere in this project? And I think it's okay to be funny, as long as you're being sincere, or if sort of tongue in cheek. And some of my music has that kind of humor, and that's okay. This is silly, but I'm just, it's okay to be silly, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it needs, from my experience, I've found just being true to who you are and being okay with that, and just expressing that, and accepting some of my ideas might be dumb, but that's all right. Let's just try it and see what happens. And sometimes they will not work out, and that's okay. You'll learn from that. And sometimes they will, and you don't really know which ones are which, and that's all right.
Yeah. It was important for me to ask you that question, because I didn't follow up before when I asked you I had a feeling that was the way you were going to answer the first time. And I think it's such an important message that we give everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a teenager, you're an adult, or you're older. I'm 39, and like I feel like I'm just starting to get comfortable, like just being myself, and no apologies needed. This is who I am. And so I feel like that's a good statement, and I wanted to ask you that. So thank you very much.
Sure.
And speaking of unique things, we're going to close with just a little bit of conversation about your recording of 4 minutes and 33 seconds with the Augsburg University Band. I'll include a link to that if people want to watch it. So what was the significance of you using that piece when we were in the distance learning model with your band? Like, why do that?
Well, I think like many of us, all of us were just caught off guard by this. I mean, we had maybe like 1 or 2 weeks of like thinking maybe we're not coming back to school, but it was very uncertain. And then the call was made during Augsburg spring break, we're not coming back to campus. And having to figure that out in a very quick way, what can I do? And for me, the core of large ensemble learning is the fact that we do it together and that we're making music. And I saw, I think everybody was trying to figure out what to do. And I saw a lot of projects about independent research and like watching YouTube videos. And I think all of that is valid because there's learning to be done there. But to me, I'm like, this was another problem to solve. How can I, with internet latency, still have rehearsal and still do something where my students are doing something together? We're making music together was our the ultimate goal. And so I think I was really inspired by Arizona State did a recording project of 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And that's sort of what sparked the idea was we could do this. We could do this live together over Zoom. And then when I started thinking about, well, how would we even do that? All of the problems to solve just jumped in my head. And I thought, there is a ton to talk about here. There's a lot of rehearsal we have to do. We had to figure out our mic settings. People had to think about where they were going to be. They had to think about, we discussed what we were going to wear. We learned about the piece. We learned a little bit about John Cage and about the meaning of the piece. There were tons of opportunities for learning doing this project and for creativity. And I actually just finished a research project with a colleague where we interviewed 8 of my students about this project and what it meant to them. And the things that they appreciated the most, we had several themes that came out, but they needed a creative outlet during this time. And this particular really open and sort of flexible piece of the John Cage really gave them an opportunity to be creative in their own space, but also as a group. And then secondly, they just wanted to be together and have some normalcy, that we're going to be together once a week in band. And, that the only downside is that downside and upside, we had synchronous meetings, which was kind of being discouraged at this time. But I just felt like we need to be doing this together. So I had about 2/3 of my students who were able to participate once everything changed. But for the students who participated, I think it was really meaningful for them to just be together and to have a project to work on. And so I was really pleased with the success of that.
Yeah. I think that you talking about that creative need is really important, especially as we head into the future, because I'm sure you've heard conversations about school districts looking at their arts programs and deciding whether or not they can continue, either because of COVID-19 or because of the financial ramifications of COVID-19. And I fear for school districts that make that choice to take away that creative moment for students in their daily schedules.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I mean, it was important It was important for all of them. You know, one of the students I spoke to was a biology major, and she said, you know, I was working so hard in biology. I felt so cut off from my colleagues in band, and she just said, I just needed this. And you know, one of the other things she said was, I was feeling really uncertain about my future, but kind of embracing the uncertainty of 4 minutes and 33 seconds and John Cage made her feel better about the uncertainty that we were all dealing with. And so it's funny, I had no idea that would be some of the ramifications of doing this, and it was more profound, I think, than I anticipated.
I bet you there's even some directors that are like, oh, why didn't I think of that first?
You know, I feel that it still has value. I think that was a question, I interviewed some other band directors about it as well. And some of them thought that maybe it served its purpose in the time we were in. But some of them also thought, you know, this is still a valid way of performing it, even when we're past the pandemic and we're back to band as usual. The students really had to make a lot of individual decisions, and that, like, sort of the onus being on the students so much for this performance is something that the students really appreciated and enjoyed. Sort of the visual element of it all, like how they're going to do it. So I think that while it fit our moment in time, I do think there's value in replicating it. Think of if we could have a performer on every continent in the world.
Well, Erika, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us talking about this stuff. And I really find you inspirational. And again, you're just a kind human being, and I've enjoyed our relationship so much.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
All right. Thank you.